At what moment did you realize you were dating an idiot? Story 1. He worked with kids with special needs and did a really good job. He was generally well-meaning. He wanted to become the world's leading expert in autism. Fine. Good for you. So I brought him along to my university library, where he spent a day copying a textbook on autism line by line. I asked him how it was going and he said great. Then he and I had a conversation where I told him that to be a world expert on autism would take more than reading and copying books. It would involve research, being really involved in the field, and gaining formal education. After that one day in the library, he never went back. I didn't say he couldn't, he just lost interest. He did that a lot, would get super excited about one subject, and then the next day it would just be over, forgotten. This happened with poker after he watched the movie Rounders. He lived with a bunch of guys. They all didn't like him, but he was completely oblivious to this. They asked me a lot why I was with him. He set up poker night immediately, and then lost all his money. He was super poor, so he lost about $100, and I forbade him from getting loans to gamble more. Again, the next day, it was gone from his head. The same thing with free mountain climbing after we watched a Mission Impossible movie where Tom Cruise scaled a rock face with no ropes. I told him he should try free skydiving instead. I was getting pretty sick of this by this point. He laughed, and it was gone from his mind again. His big dream, and one that actually lasted the longest, was that he wanted to be a mortgage broker. His dad was one and was really successful. He just couldn't do the math, though. He had to take a course, and I tried to teach him the formulas, but he just couldn't do it. We were running through problems, and then he turned to me with an exasperated look on his face. Why do the numbers keep changing? As in, why would the numbers change in a certain formula from one problem to another? This almost tied for the most stupid experience, the big blanket in the sky, but not knowing about space, and the sun and general knowledge of how the Earth is situated in terms of our solar system seemed a little more profoundly deficient to me. For all those asking, he did not have a charming personality. He was not especially attractive. He was sweet and well-meaning sometimes when he wanted to be, but he got more and more controlling as time went on. He controlled my every move by the end, and as I had low self-confidence, I felt like it was my fault, and that by being better he would eventually treat me better. He did not. Things were going towards physical control, and I left. He followed me a little afterward. Through a natural move due to school, I took the opportunity to lay low, and he left me alone, thankfully. It ended 15 years ago, and since then I've married and am very happy with his polar opposite, an extremely intelligent man with a kind heart. Story 2. I had been dating this girl for a few months, and it was Christmas time. We weren't super serious, but it was serious enough that I was buying her Christmas presents. I found something for her that was perfect, and it had a connection to some funny event involving her and my cat. So I made the present from the cat. I thought I was being cute and she would make the connection. Instead, she got upset that my cat got her a present and I didn't. I thought she was joking. To make matters worse, we were at her parents' place and they backed her up. It was extremely awkward, and I realized it wasn't going to work out. Story 3. She claimed to have a doctorate in emotionology. A doctorate. I asked her what her master's thesis was on and what her dissertation included. She looked at me like I was speaking nonsense. She insisted it was a legitimate study. She got angry if her friends didn't call her doctor when introducing her. She kept a ledger of unacceptable words and colors that were not to be used in her presence. Her field of expertise proved that these words and colors oozed negativity and bred evil, causing harm, etc. One of the worst parts was meeting this strange group of friends she had that believed all this. It's like the nonsense could be contracted and spread. I could talk about that brief relationship for hours. The absolute nonsense this person believed or fabricated was dumbfounding. Then there were completely logical concepts that just seemed downright alien to her. She could not grasp them at all, such as the difference between the light spectrum of color shades and pigment shades. Story 4. In high school, I was in an extracurricular program after school. There was one portion of it that was pretty much all girls. I dated a girl from this portion all throughout high school. I went to all of their events and helped out. I always wondered why none of the other girls or their parents really talked to me. Right before we graduated, I brought it up to her, and she told me that she told all of them that I was physically and verbally mean all the time. When I asked her why, she told me it was so no one else would take me away from her. I broke up with her shortly after. Story 5. I met this woman on a dating site. We talked on the phone briefly, passed each other's phone test. Kind of thought it was weird she referred to me as her boyfriend right away. But she was good looking. We agreed to meet for lunch that afternoon, visit an art gallery, and have drinks. She was not engaging at all. She talked about very superficial things with not much depth either. Didn't ask what I did for a living or anything else personal about me, and didn't know who the PM of our country was, and he had been the PM for a decade. The surprising moment came when I tested her to see if she was actually listening to what I was saying because I had the feeling she wasn't. So I threw in, I was addicted to heroin for 5 years and I'm 1 year sober. Without blinking an eye like I was talking about my favorite color, she said, oh yeah. Every opinion she had, she would end with, literally, agree. And I had to say yes or no. Inappropriate talk about her parents' escapades on the first date. Then she told me she was a blue baby. Never hearing the term, I asked what that meant. Infant deprived of oxygen at birth for a period of time. Then it clicked. She was good looking, with a great body. She wanted to come back to my place, but it felt like I was dealing with someone who was a bit challenged. And that was our first and last date. I felt bad for her because someone is going to take advantage of her. Story 6. It happened last night, and I'm still upset. We drove up to a roundabout and were the first ones to arrive at the scene of a pretty rough car accident that just happened. It was between a cop car and a car with a couple of younger women, all airbags deployed, and the girl's car was definitely totaled. We pulled up, and the cop was rolling out of the driver's seat, and I called 911 for an ambulance. The cop seemed okay, and went to check on the younger girls who were screaming and were definitely hurt, shocked. We heard sirens, and other cop cars showed up immediately. So the best thing we figured to do was get out of the way and go about our night. The strange part is this. We get in our truck and I tell my boyfriend he has time to pull back into the now backed up roundabout. His response was, hold on, I'm making a Snapchat post. I'm like, what are you doing? We need to clear out of here before it gets too busy and so we're not in the way of the cops. Is now really the time? Then I see the post. It was a video of the accident, then the camera panning back to him smiling, saying, they're out here getting the police too. Now, to clarify, we weren't at the accident site for long, so during the time I was checking on the cop, and the girl was screaming in pain from her car, and the officer was trying to get her out, my boyfriend was recording that video. 1. I found that disgustingly insensitive at the very least. 2. I called him out for his first instinct to be pulling out his phone and recording. We drove home in silence that night, and I still don't know what to say to address that childish behavior. Story 7. I dated a really manipulative and horrible person for a bit who would hide behind his strange interpretation of the Bible. I can do anything I want as long as I ask for forgiveness after. I can't go to hell no matter what I do because I'm saved. So one time we were having a conversation about how he lets his friends mistreat me, so I didn't want to hang out with them anymore. The kind of healthy talk in relationships where you're just trying to feel understood. I mentioned to him that if I ever saw people mistreating him, I would come to his defense because I cared about him. He says, but I'm not you. Just because you pee sitting down doesn't mean I have to pee sitting down. In that moment, I realized what I was getting myself into and broke it off immediately. Also, I had seen him pee sitting down. Just wanted to add that. Story 8. This girl I was dating many years ago and I were watching a found footage movie on Netflix. It was clearly edited. Every shot used the rule of thirds, to an almost painful extent in every selfie shot. And there were a million moments where someone was running for their lives but kept the camera perfectly focused on themselves. Halfway through, she told me she loves these movies because it's all real footage. I thought she was joking until I realized she wasn't. It took a solid half an hour of going through IMDb and Wikipedia pages before she finally understood how movies worked. We ended up breaking up soon after for a completely unrelated reason involving talking animals, so that relationship was just not meant to last. Story 9. My high school sweetheart, whom I was with for 4 years. There are many instances of him being awful, but for time's sake, I'll pick one. When we would go to restaurants, he would do this thing before we left, where he would order a water, only to put a napkin over it, flip it over and leave it upside down on the table, so that the busboy or whoever cleared the table would then get water all over the place. He thought it was hilarious, and I thought it was incredibly obnoxious. Anyway, years later, I had just had my second child and was out with my CL and her friends for an overnight at the beach, where my ex's family has a summer cottage. We walked in, and there was my ex working there. We were sat at one of his tables, and after he brought our food, he grabbed a chair and sat down next to me to chat. It was fine until I mentioned my newborn son. All of a sudden, he started being snarky and saying rude things like, "I'm surprised you didn't give him a celebrity baby name." And then, "I'm glad I didn't have kids with you because I want my kids to have blue eyes." Well, funny enough, I offered to pay the tip. First, I asked my ex for a new water. Then I dumped out all the loose change in my purse and all the ones I had and dumped them in my water. Then I put a napkin on top. Story 10. I dated a man for 7 years long distance. Only about an hour drive, so not too long distance. I always knew he was bad with money, had terrible credit, and wasn't terribly responsible. But I didn't know how bad until in the span of 1 week, he got his car repossessed, got evicted, and got his identity stolen. He had given his tax returns to a guy he met at a bar who said he was a CPA. Note, this is a grown 40-year-old man. This wasn't what made me think he was an idiot. When he told me he was moving back in with his mother, I offered him to move in with me. Unlike him, I am good with money and also work in a lucrative field, and that I'd essentially be his sugar mama, as long as he worked out a plan to get into financial shape. He said no. I said bye. But it really became clear when he came back, saying he changed his mind 5 months later. Story 11. I told her that she should not buy a car from the buy here, pay here dealership. We were both 18, 19, and had no credit history, so it was the only way to finance a car because they'd lend without credit at ridiculous prices. Not that financing is a great idea before you have real solid career income. Well, our relationship went long distance for a while, and yeah, she bought a car from there. I asked her why she did it. She already had a vehicle that she could use from her dad. Why not wait until I come into town and we can shop together? I'd received a lot of military training in how not to get ripped off when buying a car, PowerPoints and stuff, and thought I could help her. Instead, she got mad. Why can't you just be happy for me? I finally got a car of my own. And yet still confessed that her payments were too high. I didn't rub it in with "I told you so," but that's what I was thinking the whole time. We didn't have much longer to go before the long-distance portion of our relationship ended. Met after high school. I enlisted, and we had plans to move in together after I finished my 18 months of training. But yeah, we had a few moments like that, and she essentially made me break up with her. She tried to get me back over the years, but I kept learning about more and more bad decisions she made, and I thought I didn't want to take on the burden of her poor decision-making in the event of our marriage. Story 12. She was actually pretty book smart, but somehow lacked a lot of common sense. When we started dating, she would drive, as I didn't have a car. It was in the middle of the winter and freezing outside. She apologized and put the windows down and the cold AC on to prevent the windows from fogging. I was shocked, but didn't want to offend her, so I asked her why she didn't turn the AC to hot to defog. "It doesn't work." "You mean the heat doesn't work?" "No, the heat works perfectly fine. It just doesn't defog my windows." She somehow thought that physics just stopped for her car. She demonstrated her theory by turning the AC up by 1 degree for 5 seconds, and when that would not help, her point was proven. I was trying to wrap my head around this. I'm no mechanic myself and knew she was smart, so my dumbest part was to question myself, lol. I later persuaded her to try it with the highest heat for a minute, and she was surprised to have a clear view. The poor woman was commuting 2 hours every day for 3 years with open windows and AC on the coldest setting in the freezing winter. No idea how many friends and partners she drove around like that. Story 13. I was having a bit of a temper tantrum today when I couldn't get my brand new MacBook to connect to the internet. I went back to the store to return it, where I was promptly turned away, then went home to try and see what I could do to get it to work. I sat next to the Wi-Fi and was copying the password over and over, feeling increasingly stressed that I just lost $1,000. I was stressed out, and everyone was trying to calm me down, including my girlfriend. She was assuring me we'd figure it out, they'd take the return, and was trying to get my mind off it. I finally looked really close at the Wi-Fi password. The first 2 numbers were 63. I had been putting 62 this whole time. I got the 3 and 2 mixed up and was absolutely convinced it was 62 until then. I spent 4 hours trying to fix something that wasn't broken, so my girlfriend of almost a year fully realized today that she's the one dating someone foolish. When I told her, "I'm so dumb," she said, "I know, and I'm better for it." Say what you will, but I love her and I'm lucky she still enjoys my company. Story 14. Third date with a girl I met at a wedding. We were getting along awesome, so for the third date, I asked if she would like to go hiking at this pretty popular place with a small river and giant rocks throughout. This was more of a full-day commitment due to the long drive there. We're having a good time, and we come across a family of about 5 kids and parents. The girl looks at me and says, "Blech, only someone like that would swim in a river." Before I could comment, a couple walked by holding hands and said, "Good afternoon," to us. I said, "Hey, what's happening, fellas?" And she turned away towards me and rolled her eyes, stating, "I wish there was a place for all the people that we could just be left alone in peace and not have to worry about having things stolen or being hurt or seeing things that bother me. Know what I mean?" I just stood there shocked. Right then, a friend of mine happened to see me and ran over to say hi, saw my face, and immediately said, "I see you're busy. I'll talk to you later." That brief encounter with my friend gave me enough time to realize we had a long drive home, and I really didn't want to make it awkward. She asked me about 10 minutes from her house if I wanted to get dinner. I said absolutely. When we instead pulled up to her front door, she said, "I thought we were getting dinner." I told her, "You asked if I wanted to get dinner. I never said I wanted to with you." Reached over her and opened her car door with an added motion to get out of my car. She started to say something and I cut her off with, "I don't put up with that." That was that. Story 15. I met a girl online and we agreed to meet in person for our first date. She was 40 minutes late. No text, no call, just showed up 40 minutes late. So our date was at a restaurant. I already held off for 20 minutes before ordering anything, but by then I had an appetizer. I figured if I'd be stuck alone, I'd just get something small and finish eating at home. But she showed up. Anyway, she shows up as if nothing's wrong. She's smiling, saying it's great to finally meet me, all that. So once she sits down and settles, I ask if everything's all right since she was so late, and she didn't answer any texts, etc. I kid you not, she says, "Oh yeah, I'm just really bad with punctuality, it sucks. I gotta get better because I do want a family one day." Dude, you want a family, which starts with meeting a guy. Well, if you want to keep the guy, you show up on time and don't waste 40 minutes without any communication whatsoever. But wait, guys. The date went well, we had a great talk, so I gave her another chance. Maybe she thought I was a great possibility, so maybe she'd be on time for the next date. The next date was a few days later for an easy hike. Pretty much a stroll. She was an hour late. I abandoned the date 45 minutes in. She texted 15 minutes later saying she just got there but couldn't find me. Absolutely disrespectful to my time. Fellas and ladies of Reddit, do not tolerate someone that's so disrespectful of your time. Time is valuable and precious in this world, and if someone is going to waste yours without remorse, then ditch them. Lessons learned on my part. Story 16. My fiancé and I moved to a new country not too long ago. I specifically brought quite a bit of extra shampoo and conditioner because I like the brand, and I sometimes get tons of dandruff. About 3 months after we moved into our current place, I noticed my shampoo bottle was nearly empty, which is weird as I have short hair and generally use a mid-size coin's worth a day. Those bottles last me a year or more usually. Long story short, this woman, whom I love, who has never once seen me use body wash in the 6 years we've been together, who has been having the worst full-body acne breakout for the last 3 months since we got here, blaming it on the water, the weather, everything under the sun, decided that after reading the clearly labeled bottle in a language she speaks natively stating, shampoo and conditioner, I had suddenly picked up a body wash habit, and as she couldn't be bothered to buy any herself, she'd just use mine. She was so confused why she was slimy at night, why her acne was so bad. She wasn't rinsing off enough. A week after that chat, all was well. No more slimy bed sheets, no more body acne, no more slipping on the large quantities of shampoo that slid into the floor. Thankfully, I'd brought a backup bottle. And yes, I made a special label for her to be sure she doesn't get confused again. Story 17. I went on a summer vacation with my sister and her husband to a popular state park. There's some great hiking there and we had a good time. Gorgeous views. I mused this could be a good destination to get to know someone date as they had on-site lodging, a restaurant, a pool, etc. At the time, I was talking with a guy I had met at a convention and had known for a while through a friend there. When I first met him on the con circuit, I was going through a pretty sad divorce. My ex-husband was a hoarder and, yeah, he had been very supportive and fun to talk to. A year later, we actually had a first date that went very well right before COVID hit. It was one of the last fun things I really got to do in a social setting. Fast forward another year. He said he wanted to go on another date. He lived in a state up north that was a bit of a drive. I told him about the park lodge and that it might be a fun thing for us to do. He said he loved to hike, so we made plans and he drove down. I looked at the room cost and stuff, and he said he'd be happy to split it with me. A few days before we were due for this little vacation, he messaged me and told me he got a bonus from work and used that to purchase a lifetime pass from this popular arcade that has a bunch of rare machines. Lifetime pass, huh? How much did that put you out? $4,000? Yikes, okay, who am I to judge? It's his money, but still. The day of, he drove to my place and we took my car there to save gas. I live in a legal state, and he asked if we could stop by a dispensary on our way there, as he wanted to try edibles. I warned him those can really hit hard if you're a greenhorn, but he insisted he could handle it, and being in a natural setting and getting high would be fun. So we picked up a chocolate bar, and I got a few things. I'm an avid enjoyer of the jazz cabbage myself. I told him to only have a tiny bit of the edible before going on the trail to see how it would affect him. Keep in mind, when I asked him if he liked to hike, he said he loved hiking and did it all the time. These aren't rough trails, mind you, but he was wearing really worn-out sneakers that had holes and stuff in them. I figured he must have suitable shoes in his bag. Nope. The first 10 minutes of hiking, he was wheezing and almost ready to keel over. I asked him if he was okay, and he said yeah. We took frequent breaks. I brought extra water and did my best to help him along. He eventually got into it, and I was encouraging him to reach a particularly pretty spot. I didn't book a room and drive 2 hours to hike for 10 minutes. He kept sliding and falling, once almost off a cliff. When I could see his faculties tanking, I decided it was probably a good time to head back, check in, and have dinner. Once we were off the trail, we stopped by the visitor's lodge. He said he had to use the restroom and spent a literal hour in there. At one point, I asked a random guy if he'd check on my partner in the restroom. He came out and said that my friend would be a few more minutes. We checked in and made our way to the room. While we were getting ready, he got a little romantic. I got into it a bit and was starting to enjoy myself. He said he felt really good and was going to have more of his weed bar. All right, we're not hiking anymore and he's an adult. Sure, dude, go for it. Go. Now that's all set up. So we had dinner. It was awkward. I don't expect my date to pay for my meal. I'm a big girl and I'm quite fine splitting it. Somehow I ended up paying for dinner. He said he was broke, and I was instantly reminded of his $4,000 arcade pass and weed purchases. Man, dude, you're really not selling yourself here. So we get back to the room and he wanted to have fun. However, by that time the edible was really affecting him hard. I didn't think he was in any state to really get romantic, but he was insistent on trying. From that point, he started having a bad experience with it. I ended up taking care of him as he started crying and going over some of his childhood trauma. He sobbed and went to sleep naked in the middle of the bed. I decided to take a bath. When I was done, he was completely zonked and splayed out on the bed. And honestly, I really didn't want to bed up with him anymore. I thought about just leaving him there, but I knew that wouldn't be a cool thing for me to do, in spite of the date being a dumpster fire. I ended up drying out the bathtub, dropped some blankets and a pillow in there, and slept in the tub. The next morning was an awkward drive home. He never contributed to the room either. The worst part was he thought the date went swimmingly and asked if I could drive another 2 hours in the opposite direction to take him to his arcade. I told him I had work that night and could not. After that trip from hell, I left his messages on read for a bit to figure out how to approach it, and eventually told him that it definitely did not go well. I told him I appreciated his effort to connect with me, but that date was not it. Story 18. My ex was a graffiti artist, also known as unemployed. During quarantine, we adopted a dog. I was working 2 jobs and in school, and I was constantly exhausted and resentful because he never helped around the apartment. When I would clean, the next day the dishes would be overflowing in the sink, and his stuff, clothing, shoes, spray cans, etc., would be littered across every surface. His excuse was that he was training our dog, which essentially was him getting together with 2 friends and their dogs while hanging out at the dog park for 5 hours, smoking cigarettes and wasting time while I was working. One day, I came home from my second job of the day. I took off my shoes and proceeded into the living room where he was with our dog. All of a sudden, I felt something squishy beneath my feet. I looked down and I saw that I had stepped on a full, unpeeled banana. Aggravated, I was like, "What is this? Why is there a banana on the floor?" He looked up from his video game with a blank stare and said, "This is what it's like having a puppy. Insert name." Meanwhile, our dog was sleeping on the couch with no evidence of his desire to eat a banana. which at the time was larger than him. We broke up a month later on my birthday. Within 2 days, I found an apartment, took the dog, and accepted a job that entailed an emphasis on work-life balance and paid more than my 2 jobs combined. Story 19. I moved to the USA from Ireland. One of the first girls I quite liked, went out with more than once, and I were in the okay, let's really get to know each other phase. I asked her about her childhood, hopes, dreams, and aspirations. I sat there enraptured, listening to her talk about going from wanting to be a princess to wanting to be an astronaut to wanting to change the world. She then asked me about my childhood, and immediately, before I said anything, sympathized that it must have been really hard. When I asked why, she pointed out that it must have been hard spending all my time working on the family farm while at the same time somehow making time to educate myself. Utterly baffled, I asked what she meant, and the upshot was that she assumed everyone in Ireland was a farmer, and we apparently didn't have schools. When I pointed out that no, not everyone is a farmer, that I was actually from one of the bigger cities there, about the size of Cleveland, and that I had a degree from a fairly prestigious university, she flat out wouldn't believe me. She was eventually willing to concede that Ireland had some schools, but couldn't comprehend that we had any sort of third-level education. At this point, she was basically calling me a liar and making up stories. Story 20. I didn't have a smartphone at the time, but my girlfriend did, and I was trying to find the location of a show I wanted to go to in Chicago. So I called her and asked her to look on Google Maps for this place, and I told her the cross streets where I was and if she could just tell me which direction this bar was, and she could not figure out which direction to tell me. I was like, when you're looking at the map, up is north. But she just couldn't wrap her mind around it, and we ended up getting in a big argument about it. And when I found the place, the show was sold out. It was one of those moments when I just couldn't find any other words to explain this concept of directions. I was like, so if you're looking at the map and where I told you I'm standing is to the left of where it shows the bar, then the bar is east of me. She just couldn't give me an answer, though it was really weird. She also lived her whole life in Chicago, but didn't know how to get around the city. She would always be amazed when I knew how to get somewhere. Chicago is a flat grid with numbered streets on the south side, and every street sign has block numbers, so you can literally look at any cross street and know exactly where you are in the city. This concept was too complicated for her to ever grasp. She was in a constant state of being lost. Story 21. I dated a girl who was incredibly concerned with COVID when it first hit. She lives at home with her parents, her brother, and her young daughter, so during the pandemic, she avoided going anywhere because she was worried about catching it, or worse, passing it on to her family. She even made me take COVID tests before seeing her if I had been out in public. Of course, I didn't mind because even though I myself wasn't too worried about COVID, I can understand why so many people were, and I respected her enough not to take any chances. Then one day she told me about how she was going to go to a BLM rally. Yeah, going out to stand close together with a bunch of random strangers who may or may not be sick themselves. So I asked her why she would do that if she was so worried about COVID. I mean, she was the one who said she was worried about catching it and passing it on to her elderly parents because they might not survive it, as well as passing it to her daughter. And she says, well, this is important. So let me get this straight. You're deathly afraid of COVID to the point where you believe very well that it could kill you and or your family, and you take all these precautions to avoid it at all costs, yet you're willing to risk everything just to go stand on a street corner protesting? Story 22. I dated a girl with type 1 diabetes. I went into it hesitant because I share custody of a toddler, and she's my world and my priority is that she gets enough time with me, her father who works full-time. The girl I was dating was jealous of the attention I gave my daughter. I tried not to hold it against her because the girl was starving for affection. The problem was with how she handled her diabetes. She would constantly eat sugary sweets all day like donuts and candy, and when she slept in my bed, she would have seizures throughout the night. I'd try to get her to take insulin, but she would refuse and go back to having problems in her sleep. But that wasn't the moment. The shocking moment is because this girl was skinny, about 110 pounds, 5 to 6 inches with a very round and curvy body, the kind of physique all my coworkers noticed and gave me a way to go. But every time we were intimate, it smelled terrible, like something really unpleasant. It grew to the point that regardless of how attractive she was, I lost my appetite for intimacy with her because the stench was overpowering. I ended up breaking up with her because I just wanted to spend time with my kid and didn't want a relationship, especially with someone not taking care of themselves. About 2 months after we broke up, I mentioned the smell to a mutual female friend, and she enlightened me. The girl had been eating laxatives every day for years to maintain being skinny. I think all that caused the smell. Really gross stuff. Story 23. It all starts when I was 13 years old. I had a crush on this girl that studied in the same high school. I asked her out, kid dates, and we really hit it off. One day she broke up with me because I was being too corny and not bold or adventurous enough. 13 years later, I'm in a new country living alone. She followed me on IG. I followed back and we started to talk again. She asked me out. I agreed, and my expectations were just to hang out, to have a friend in a new country. We went to a coffee shop late, 15 minutes to close, and we ordered some ice cream. The guy who was serving the ice cream had special needs and he asked us not to have a specific flavor, and she immediately said that she wanted that one. I thought it was rude, but well, we had the ice cream to go and sat on a square. It was going good. We laughed and talked about our lives and jobs. A few minutes later, she said she was hungry, and I suggested a sushi restaurant nearby. She accepted, telling me, "I can eat a lot of sushi. I used to work in a restaurant." I laughed and kept going. In the restaurant, we sat at a small table face to face. We ordered 40 pieces. I wasn't that hungry, but she insisted that she ate a lot. The food came, and as soon as the sushi came, she reached for the chopsticks, fixed them, picked a piece, and removed the rice of the sushi and ate only the content of the sushi. How come you don't eat the rice of the sushi? It's the base of it. I saw that and tried to ignore it, but 20 pieces in, I asked why. Why? And she said that she wasn't feeling like eating rice at the moment. She made me ask for 40 pieces of sushi because she was hungry, and yet she just threw the rice of the sushi. I ate my pieces and kept thinking to myself, why? She finished and asked for a soda. I was really uncomfortable because I was supposed to pay for the whole meal. It wasn't cheap, neither expensive, and she left like 50% of the whole food. I asked for the bill and offered to pay. The waiter told me that there's no problem paying with a debit card, yet she asked us to pay the tip in cash. I had no cash on me, so I asked her if she could take care of the tip. She said yes confidently, so I proceeded to pay for dinner. I paid and came back to the table, and she reached for her purse and gave the tip to the waiter. The tip she gave wasn't even the 5% of the whole bill. I smiled to the waiter and started walking toward me. I looked into the waiter's eyes, trying to say telepathically, "Sorry for that," with googly eyes. The waiter nodded to me and we kept going. Story 24. He hadn't been on trains very often, so I was helping him home. I got into the city by bus. He got in on the train. The ticket was only good for GWR tickets in one direction. I helped him through the station and onto the right platform. I didn't have to pay for a ticket as I had a special card. And as we're waiting for the train, we have an argument because he missed the last train because he wanted to buy me something, and the checkout took longer than expected. I tried to encourage him to just buy it later, but he refused. He said, "I'm done talking to someone like you, just go home." So I wrote down on a cup that he needed to get on the green train that should have Great Malvern on it. I left the platform. I left the station. I went home. As I'm on the bus, he calls me to let me know he got on a cross-country train and doesn't know where he's going. I tell him to just find the attendant and ask for help. I tell him not to get off the train without at least finding out what direction he's gone in. He gets off the train at an unknown, unstaffed station in the middle of the night. He cries down the phone, asking me what to do. I tell him to call a friend or hire a taxi. I even tell him where to find the taxi listings in the station. He fully leaves the station and walks around some, apparently poorly lit town, crying down the phone and asking me to come pick him up. I can't. He didn't even tell me the name of the village, which he couldn't have gotten from the station. I tell him that he needs to get back to the station because it's well lit and easy to find, and he says he can't. He's lost. I ask him to at least try to turn around, and he yells down the phone that it's my fault for not staying at the station and not helping him enough when he got lost. Within 2 hours, he got more lost than I've ever seen anyone be lost. The train he got on was pink and gray, not green. It also said cross-country on the side. GWR trains also have the name on the side. He had been on a green train before, even had done the journey before. He knew what train it was. He had been on one that same day. I wrote on the cup, GWR train, green, headed to Great Malvern. Will not be the first train that pulls up. This may have been confusing, but I pointed out just before I left that there are overhead displays showing that the Great Malvern train will be the second to arrive. I told him it would not be the first train he sees. He took the first train that pulled up. He told me that it would be easy to find a taxi wandering around town instead of just calling a number. I had lined up every single step of his journey for him before we headed out, and I'd sent him links to Google Maps journeys that showed exactly what he should do and when. Everything was set out for him. He would have to be actively hurting the plan to be lost. I still do not know which town he was in or what direction the train was headed in. We stayed together for a few months after that. I was not the one to end things. Story 25. So a few months prior to this moment, about 25 years ago, I was essentially pressured into having an intimate relationship with a man who was much younger than me. Upon first meeting him, I knew I didn't like him. I thought he was immature, insincere, and obnoxious. But I needed a place to stay at the time. He claimed he had paid his rent an extra month in advance for the apartment he was moving out of by mistake. The truth was, he paid the rent for an extra month just so he could show up every day and try to get me to be intimate with him. One day I had a weak moment. I gave in. I was so mad at myself. In any case, a couple of months later, he decided to do something nice for me by driving me to the northeastern US, where I had grown up. While we were returning back to the Midwest, we stopped in NYC to visit an old friend of mine named Mary. Mary just happened to be psychic, and when I arrived, she announced to me that I was pregnant. Like that I had gotten pregnant within the past week. O_0. Turns out she was correct. Well, this man and I stopped in the West Village as one final stop before heading back to the Midwest. While we were away from his car, which was a beat-up old Toyota, his car was broken into. I swear to God, all that was stolen was a couple of his old books and a few CDs. Nothing else. So this dude, by whom I was now 1 week pregnant, proceeded to have a panic attack, and he began driving recklessly all over the West Village, looking in dumpsters to see if he could find his 2 freaking books and his 3 old CDs that had been stolen from his beat-up old Toyota. I was like, OMG, WTH have I done? Needless to say, this man's panic attack did not resolve immediately. He was therefore scarcely capable of driving us out of NYC. I couldn't drive us, though, because I had never learned how to drive, so I didn't have a license. Also, this man, who was barely able to keep the car on the road, was too distressed to read road signs or read a map, so I, who had never driven in or out of NYC, or even driven a car at all, and who had little to no experience reading maps, somehow managed to navigate us out of NYC and towards the Midwest. I have no idea how I did it. There seriously must have been divine intervention happening that day because there is no way I could have used a map to navigate my way out of a paper bag, let alone NYC. Anyway, it turned out that Mary was right. I was indeed pregnant, and I didn't feel capable of getting an abortion, so I had the baby. It did become evident during my pregnancy, though, that not only did this man have regular and quite severe panic attacks, but he also refused to see a doctor or psychiatrist to get help. In addition to that, he turned out to be very verbally and emotionally abusive to me. I managed to leave the relationship by the time our son turned 5, but this man continued to yell at me throughout the years whenever he got an opportunity to. In any case, our son has turned out to be the most caring, kind, mentally and emotionally healthy, hardworking, compassionate, intelligent young man I could ever have hoped to bring into this world. He doesn't smoke cigarettes and he doesn't even drink alcohol. Not because he can't, but because he simply doesn't feel the need and has never felt the need to ingest any mind or mood-altering substances. I know, crazy, right? So my OMG WTH have I done moment or series of dozens of moments that took place over many years were 100% redeemed by the birth of this amazing son of mine. But talk about my I'm dating a freaking idiot moment. That afternoon in the West Village when I was stuck with a panic-stricken dude driving around like a maniac looking for a couple of old books and a few CDs in dumpsters. And all of this in addition to the fact that my psychic friend had just told me I was 1 week pregnant. Story 26. He had kids. They had a sitter that night and we got drunk at her place and started to tell me about her baby daddy. So I listened to her. Me always having the approach that if a woman has kids, never take the dad away because all kids need a father. She goes on to tell me she does not want him to have any kind of visitation rights, and that she only wants his money. She already knew that I had this stance towards kids, but she said stuff like this anyways, with me thinking, if this is how you talk about him, I know this is how you will think towards me. I'm looking for a wife, and you are not it. And what a wonderful choice that was. Now I've been married for 5 years to the best woman I've ever met in my lifetime. There is more. I had another girl. She also had kids. No worries, same approach as the time before. But this was not much of an issue because we agreed. That was good. She had some "it's the right thing to do" smarts about her, but not too much else. She said something to the effect of, "I'm going to make some fried chicken," so I said, "Yeah, why not?" She starts doing this. I'm doing something else, and we get to the "let's wait for it to cook a bit" stage. I go over to check on the chicken because, hey, why not? And I literally see a tall pot of oil filled to the top with already fried and frozen chicken in it sitting on the bottom. The first thought wasn't, "Why are you going to fry already fried chicken?" It was, "Hey, you're going to burn the house down." She was insistent that she would not, and I was insistent that it would be impossible to make that judgment because even if it boils over a little and runs down the side of that pot on the hot coil, it's going to catch on fire. Then I said, "Okay, let's say for 1 minute I'm right, and a decent oil fire is happening right here. How are you going to put it out?" And she said, "I'd just pour water in it." OMG, you're going to kill everyone in this place. I went on to show her why that would be a dumb idea with some YouTube videos back then. Here's another one about food with a different girl. We were at her sister's house, and I was chilling on the couch. She asked me if I wanted a corn dog, and I said yes, but only if you cook them the good way. If not, then no. That would mean the oven. She said yes, and I thought, okay, cool. Haven't had a corn dog in a long time. She comes back to me in like 2 minutes with a bowl and 2 sticks coming out of the edge. I thought it strange how fast that was, but assumed she was already doing them and it must have almost been ready. And strange to choose a bowl. But whatever. I picked it up, and it's this limp, wet, soggy corn dog. And I just looked up at her holding this thing, kind of confused and sad, and said, "I thought you were going to cook them the good way." She said, "Yes, I did in the microwave." And I said, "No, that's the bad way. The good way is in the oven." And without missing a beat, she says to me, and I quote, "You can't put corn dogs in the oven. The sticks will catch on fire." I was just at a loss for words on that one. Later that day, I showed her what a corn dog from the oven tasted like. She said, "Ooh, these are just like the ones from the carnival." To this day, I still can't imagine how she would have cooked them the bad way if the microwave was the good way.